Hi everybody. So in today's video, we're going to be reviewing how to graph a line. And so what we're going to do right now is go over how to graph these four lines that you see here. For problem number 16, what we need to start by reviewing is that whenever you graph a line, there are two pieces of information that you need in order to make that graph. You're going to need to figure out the starting point of the line, which is going to have two components. You're going to need an x in your starting point, and you're going to need a y value for your starting point. You're also going to need to figure out the slope of the line. And the slope is always going to want to be a fraction. So I like to start by kind of organizing my thinking by kind of labeling that I need a starting point and a slope. And you'll notice that that's how I start every single one of these problems. All right, now, in order to find your starting point, we're actually going to look at the letters in the equation to help us figure out which numbers are the x and which numbers are the y. So the number for the y value is always going to be next to the letter y. It's also going to be the number that is not attached to the x in any way. It's not outside the parentheses and it's not inside the parentheses. It's kind of separate from everything else. In this case, the starting y value would be the number 1. Now, after that, we're going to find the starting x value. The starting x value is always going to be next to the letter x, but the thing about x is that it's always the opposite of what you see. So in this case, instead of saying that my starting x value is positive 2, my starting x value would actually be negative 2. The slope is always going to be the number that's in the middle of the equation. In this case, that would be the number 3. In order to make that look like a fraction, I'm going to write 3 over 1. Now, when I'm going to graph this, I'm going to begin by graphing my starting point. So because my starting point says x should be negative 2, on the x-axis on the graph, I'm going to find the number negative 2. And since the starting point says that my y-coordinate should be positive 1, on the y-axis of the graph, I'm going to go to where the number is positive 1. Now, if I kind of match up those two things, so the positive 1 for y and the negative 2 for x, then the starting point would be located right here where those two meet, which is right there. So you're looking for x is negative 2 and y is positive 1. Now my slope is going to be rise over run. So it's important to remember that slope is always going to tell us instructions. So it's either going to tell us to go up or down, and then it's either going to tell us to go right or left. So it's how we move from one point to another. The rise here is 3, which means I'm going to go up by 3 because it's positive. If it was negative, I would go down. And the run here is positive 1. So I'm going to go one space to the right. After following those instructions, I land on this point right here. So that would be the next point on my graph. Now I'm going to repeat those instructions. I'm going to go up 3 spaces. I'm going to go to the right 1 space, and I'm going to stop there and put a point. And once I have several points on my graph, I'm just going to draw a nice straight line through those points to get a picture of my graph, and I'm going to put arrows at the ends. For problem number 17, you're going to notice I'm going to start the same way. I need to find my starting point. And I need to find my slope. Now my starting point should still have two components, an x and a y, and my slope should still be a fraction. In order to find my x and my y, I'm going to start with the y, because to me that's always easiest. The y is going to be the number that's right next to the letter y. It's just not going to be attached to anything else. It's not going to be attached to the x in any way. In this case, that means that the starting y value would be a positive 5. Now, in order to find the starting x value, I'm just going to look next to the letter x and see if there's a parentheses there. In this case, because there's no parentheses, I don't see x plus 2 or x minus 2 like I did in the previous problem. That tells me that my starting x must have been 0. because there's no number being added or subtracted from the x, and the number that means that there are none would be the number 0. Now my slope would be negative 1/2 because that's the number that's in the middle here. So I would have negative 1/2 as my slope. Now, just like before, I'm going to graph my starting point first. So the x here is 0, which means I'm going to stay right here on the x-axis. And the y here is 5, which means I'm going to go right here. Where those two would meet would be right here on the positive 5. So I'm going to begin my graph there. Now my slope is negative 1/2. What I need to remember is that slope is rise over run. So slope is telling me here instructions on how to move. In this case, because my slope has a negative 1, I'm going to rise, or in other words, go down 1 space. And since the run is positive 2, I'm going to go to the right 2 spaces. So if I follow those instructions, if I go down 1 space and then I go right 2 spaces, I land right here, which is my next point on my graph. I'm going to keep following those instructions. Go down 1 space, go right 2 spaces until I run out of space on the graph. So I literally hit like the edge of the graph and I can't go any further. Once I have all of these points in a row, then I'm going to draw a nice straight line through those points in order to draw my graph. All right, next. You'll notice that this equation looks a little bit different. In the first two equations, the term that had the x was always at the end, and in this equation, the term that has the x is at the beginning. When you see an equation like this, where the term that has the x is at the beginning, the first step here is going to be to rearrange this equation so that the term that has the x is at the end. So I want to flip the order here. And I just want to switch the -4 and the 2/3. So I'm going to put the -4 first and then plus the 2/3 x at the end. And then I'm going to copy down the y equals. The reason I want to do that is it kind of puts the numbers in an order where it's easy to find the x, the y, and the slope. Again, I'm going to need a starting point and a slope. Now, my starting point here, again, is going to have two components. It's going to have an x and a y. The x here is going to be inside of the parentheses by the letter x. However, in a problem where there's no parentheses, the x would just be 0, just like we saw in the previous problem. The starting y value is going to be right next to the letter y, which is right here. So my starting y value would be -4. And my slope would be positive 2/3. It's right in the middle. Now again, I'm going to start by graphing my starting point. It tells me where to begin my graph. So I'm going to begin my graph where x is 0. Now in this problem, x is 0 is going to be right here in the middle. And where y is -4, which is going to be right down here. And so my starting point of my graph is going to be where those two kind of dots would align, which is right down there. Next, I'm going to graph my slope. So my slope is going to be rise over run. In this case, because both numbers are positive, I'm going to rise 2 spaces and then run 3 spaces. So I'm going to go up and to the right. So I'm going to go up 2 spaces, right 3 spaces, put a point there. Up 2 spaces, right 3 spaces, put a point there. Then we're just going to graph my nice straight line. Last but not least, you'll notice that this problem looks very similar to the first problem that we did. It's just that in this example, the order is switched and the x term is at the beginning. What we want to do is make sure that we always start by rearranging the equations that the x is at the end, because that's going to help us pick out the right x, y, and slope. So we're going to write the +3 at the beginning, and then minus 2 parentheses x plus 1. So I'm just flipping the order here. Now I can find my starting point and my slope. I'm just going to kind of get myself organized. So starting point is going to have an x and a y. Slope is going to be a fraction. In this problem, my starting x is going to be inside of the parentheses next to the letter x, which kind of makes sense, right? The x number is next to the letter x. Only we need to remember that when it comes to x, it's always the opposite of what you see. So it's going to be a -1 instead of a +1. My starting y is going to be at the beginning right by the letter y. So in this case, that would be the number 3. My slope is going to be in the middle. So my slope here would be -2. And in order to make this look like a fraction, I'm going to put that over 1. Now I'm going to graph. So I'm going to begin with my starting point, just like I have in the other problems. My starting x is -1, so I'm going to put that right there. My starting y is +3. If I kind of line up where those things would be, you can see that those two coordinates would meet right here at this point. So that's my starting point. Now, because the top number is negative, I'm going to go down 2 spaces. And since the bottom number is positive, I'm going to go right 1 space. So I'm going to go down 2 spaces, right 1 space, down 2 spaces, right 1 space, down 2 spaces, right 1 space, down 2 spaces, right 1 space. And every time I follow those instructions, when I stop, I'm going to put another point on my graph. Now I'm just going to draw a line through those points, and that is the graph of the line. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let's do some practice so you guys can do a retake.